Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Democratic leaders in the Connecticut General Assembly say they'll have a budget deal with Governor Lamont before the legislative session ends. But they'll need to reach agreement on some proposals that Lamont has said he doesn't support, like tax hikes on the wealthy. Could minority Republicans play a role? Today, Where We Live, we talk to the number 2 Republican in the state Senate, Senator Paul Formica. You can join us as well, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or you can share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. Senator Paul Formica joins us again on Zoom. He's the Senate Republican leader pro tem, representing the 20th District. That's made up of several towns, including East Lyme, Old Saybrook, and the city of New London. Senator Formica, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, I understand, are you in your 3rd term, Senator Formica?
I am in my 4th term.
4th term. And you are a longtime business owner of Flanders Fish Market and Restaurant in East Lyme. How's that been going for you in this last year?
You know, the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, as everyone knows by now, suffered, greatly during the last year in the pandemic, with nearly 800 restaurants closing across the state. We were able to hang in there. This is our 38th year of operation, and I got to tell you, I got the greatest staff in the business who, really came together and worked hard to make sure that we did all of the things we needed to do to stay safe for them and for our customers. It seems to have paying dividend as we come out of this long time pandemic.
Mm. Now, on top of that, you again have been representing the 20th District for some time. You were with the state Senate last night, several proposals moving through, including expansion of online gambling and sports betting in our state. But I wanted to get reaction from you first, because there is a colleague in the state Senate, Senator Dennis Bradley, who's been indicted on federal campaign finance charges. He's accused of having his campaign workers alter the dates on campaign contribution cards ahead of the 2018 election, and those altered contribution cards were later sent to the State Elections Enforcement Commission in an effort to qualify Senator Bradley for tens of thousands of dollars in state campaign money. Now, Democratic leaders of the state Senate have removed him from his post as chairman of the Public Safety Committee. I wanted you to respond to when you heard the news, and how serious are these allegations, Senator?
Well, certainly the allegations are serious, and Senator Bradley has a lot to deal with moving forward. Certainly, I'd like to see the process play out before I comment on the situation, as I really don't know the details other than, what we heard sketches of last night and the reaction by the leadership of the Senate Democrats. And that's where we are now. And now I guess it's up to Senator Bradley and the courts to kind of work out a solution and, see if he can move forward.
When you think about how this all panned out, the fact that we've got the Citizens Election Program, the importance of clean elections, and while he received one of the grants, there was a citizen complaint, and the commission ended up not even giving him a second election grant. Do you think that the protections in this program are working, Senator?
Well, I think it's a great program. I think it definitely needs some tweaks here and there, but certainly it's a great program. And I think if I don't know the details of Senator Bradley's situation, but if they, meaning the commission, were looking into it and they seem to have uncovered some wrongdoing and they seem to have taken proper steps and taken their time to make a decision, because I understand this was some time ago. So then I guess the program is working, and I think the program has allowed a lot of people to participate in state elections where perhaps they would not have been able to raise the funds necessary to do so, and it's leveled the playing field. And it's a program that I've used since I ran for Senate first in 2014 November election. So, I think we let the situation play out and see what the commission comes up with.
I mentioned the Senate met last night, and sports betting and online gambling is moving forward to the governor's desk. Senator Bradley was, I believe, the chair of the Senate Public Safety and Security Committee, so one of the committees that was handling this gambling expansion bill. Did his arrest have any impact on the debate for that measure last night?
Well, the Public Safety Committee has been the committee of cognizance over conversation with gaming. And with the change in leadership, this year with two new chairs, with Senator Bradley and Representative Horn, the Safety Committee took a little bit of a different direction toward online gaming. And, I think we saw the results of that last night. Fittingly, Senator Kathy Austin, from Sprague, who was a co-chair of that Public Safety Committee, was named chairman of the committee. And so she brought the bill out. And I say fittingly because no one has worked harder on this issue in moving online gaming and sports betting and that bill forward than Kathy Austin. The Southeastern delegation were united. We worked hard together because we understand the impact of to Eastern Connecticut specifically because of the jobs and the importance of the success of the two largest tribal casino resorts in the world. And so Senator Austin, I thought, did a great job standing in and presenting the bill, and I think it made made the presentation of the legislation a lot easier with the absence of the chair.
So talk through more of the benefits, obviously helping jobs, especially in the eastern part of our state. But when we think about the projected revenue and taxes from sports betting and online gambling, talk more about why this is needed in our state, Senator Formica.
Well, it's, online gaming is not new. It's new to Connecticut now, but it's not new. States surrounding us have generated significant revenue from online gaming and sports betting after the decision some years ago to, by the federal courts to allow that to move forward. So, especially given the fact that we have kind of a unique situation with gambling here in Connecticut as it's governed by the compacts that, then Governor Weicker signed 30 years ago or so with Foxwoods and then modified with the Mohegan tribe. So they've grown into the 5 and 6 highest job producers in the state. Their philanthropic initiatives are legendary. They support the community. They are part of the community, and they do so much for drawing traffic in the hospitality industry. And that's lifted up not only Eastern and Southeastern Connecticut, but I think it's lifted up Connecticut as a destination. And we have so much to offer here as far as tourism and arts and culture. This is, really the signature plum of the state that, attracts people and attracts hundreds of thousands of people when, pandemic aside, we hope that that's going to continue.
And how soon will we see, Senator Formica, it looks like you're getting a notification on your computer, if you could mute that. How soon will the state be seeing sports betting in Connecticut? What needs to happen before the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs?
Well, the governor needs to sign the legislation, and then it will go down to the feds for their approval. But I'm sure that they've been in contact with the negotiations all along. So hopefully that will hopefully that will just be, something that will happen very quickly. And then, the implementation process, the mechanics of actually getting, the hardware and the software and all of that set up so that it can be, that can be implemented. And it could be midsummer or the fall and before it starts generating. And I think it's going to generate significant revenue to the state, but it's also going to shore up the tribes and secure those jobs there. So, hopefully in the next few months we'll get a better understanding. But there's been a lot of background work done by everybody involved, and the governor and his team stepped in and kind of closed the loop with the negotiations, and so there's a lot of kudos to go around because people came together and gave a little, and the agreement, I think, is beneficial long term. And we kind of alluded to earlier before we came on air some of the societal issues that may come from this, and many senators in around the circle last night spoke about problem gambling and the resources that could be used from this bill and from this legislation to shore up dollars to that area. And this legislation provides that each tribe must add $500,000 annually to that initiative, and the Connecticut lottery goes up to $3 million. So hopefully that we can, as we move forward in one side of the issue, we can move forward with the other side. Senator Wong spoke eloquently last night about a study on problem gambling that was supposed to have been updated and has not been since 2008. I think we should update that and see where we are and get a good starting point so we have a good baseline as this process moves forward, and then find ways to take the necessary steps to protect the people that are going to be utilizing this service. But the tribe has a 30-year track record of working with that, so I'm hopeful that it's going to move forward smoothly.
You're hearing State Senate Republican Leader Pro Tem Paul Formica here on the show, representing the 20th District. That's several towns, including East Lyme and Old Saybrook and the city of New London. If you have a question for Senator Formica, especially about how the gambling expansion will proceed in our state, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I believe Senator Kevin Whitkos out of Canton said the restrictions on referees, coaches, and other participants in sports from wagering were insufficient. Can you talk about that concern?
Well, I think Senator Whitkos brought up a good point that, there should be, certain people excluded from using this service. It happens in other states. And I think that could be some of the fine tuning that we see moving down the road. There is, I think, a prohibition on Connecticut sports teams. Senator Whitkos raised a good point, and you don't want people involved, especially with, college athletics, to try to be tempted, if you will, to do the wrong thing here. So I thought Senator Whitkos brought up a good point, and it's probably something as we move forward that might be one of the tweaks in the legislation as we see, because, that's what happens, frankly, in a lot of legislation. You pass it initially, it moves through the General Assembly. There may be an amendment on it here or there, but then it becomes law. And then, the following session, we should be evaluating such policies such as these and kind of, tweaking them to make sure that they're better. And I thought the points by Senators Wong and Flexer and Whitkos made some good sense last night.
Let's talk about the budget. Again, legislative session ending June 9th, not too many days to hammer out a 2-year budget deal, but we hear Democratic leaders in the General Assembly say they're negotiating with the governor's administration. I'm wondering, in terms of the input that Republicans have in this process, Senator Formica, is it business as usual because Republicans are a minority party in our state that you are shut out of this process?
We have been shut out in the fine tuning conversation of the budget, if you will. I'll put it that way. I know we have a great ranking member on appropriations in Senator Minor, and a strong ranking member on the Finance and Bonding Committee in Senator Martin, who have been involved in the committee process. But beyond that, we've not been involved. And, a lot of what we talk about go back to a few years ago when you all remember we were 18-18 in the Senate, and the historic bipartisan budget, was developed. I remember as co-chair of the Appropriation Committee, along with Senator Austin, sitting down across the table and going through, 1,500 line items one at a time. It took us about 3 days to do it, and we came up with a budget together that had spending controls, borrowing controls, and the volatility cap, which was the brainchild of Senator Fonfara, and quickly embraced by most everybody on the committee. And that's what has put us in the strong position we are today. So, it's our contention that Republicans have good ideas. It's equal government, sharing of ideas certainly pays dividends when it comes to developing a budget. And we see that in the numbers that are coming out now with, federal money aside, we're doing much better than anticipated coming out of the pandemic.
So in past years, haven't your party put out its own taxing and spending plan? Has that happened recently?
We did. We put out probably close to 8 or 9 budgets up and through and including the 2018 budget. But the budget that we did bipartisanly was really the only one that we were able to be taken seriously with, and we were quickly dismissed on many of the budget ideas that we went through. So it didn't seem to make sense to go through that. We have a great young budget analysis joining our team this year, and we're looking at the numbers. We will have some suggestions moving forward on the budget, and we'll see where that goes. But this budget, is I expect to come out in the probably next week, and it'll be voted on. And hopefully, the tax increases that have been talked about, I think there's $3.2 billion in projected tax increases, along with, a large amount of federal dollars. Hopefully the tax increases will go away, as there seems to be pushback now on from both parties, especially as, the picture gets a little bit rosier. The budget surplus is now almost $600 million. And we're able to put over $1 billion in that volatility cap. And, I think how that works. Anything over 15% of the budget that is saved in the budget reserve fund must be taken out and put down to pay back pension liability. And the benefits of paying pension liability, obviously, is a reduction in debt, but also a reduction in debt service, which helps, the general fund expenditure line item side of the budget.
You mentioned that you think some of the tax hikes will go away because there's been pushback. Is that something that you think is probable because Governor Lamont doesn't support it, Senator Formica, this idea of shifting some of the tax burdens off of the middle class onto the rich?
Well, Governor Lamont has stood strong on protecting the rich from getting more tax increases. He has a number of tax increases in his budget, with the $50 million insurance tax and the TCI tax, which is, an unproven, opportunity, I'll say, but it will raise some money, about $100 million. The mileage tax on trucks is another $100 million. So, the governor has put his finger on some tax increases, but you're right. He says that, and I think rightly so, taxing the rich has proven not to be a good philosophy on budget tax generation, because they simply can move, and the more mobile the economy becomes, the more likely and the more apt they are to move. That goes back to when Kevin Sullivan was, a former lieutenant governor and president of the Senate. When he was Commissioner of Revenue Services, he spent a lot of time talking to the Appropriations Committee, I was a member back then, about the work that he did tracking the high earners and the amount of taxes that they paid and the percentage. So I think it's important there needs a balance. There needs to be a balance. And one of the things that I really think we should take the time to do is, instead of throwing, tax possibilities at specific sectors, I think it's time to get a bipartisan committee of the legislature together and really look at redoing the tax code, top to bottom. I think it needs to be more fair. Certainly, things can change and there can be some tweaks. But I think that's something that really needs to be done, and do an overall tax overhaul instead of just saying, let's tax this and let's tax that.
Let's talk more about this after the break. My guest today is State Senate Republican Leader Pro Tem Paul Formica. He represents the 20th Senatorial District. If he's your state senator, you can join us. If you have a question for him, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. My guest today, State Senate Republican Leader Pro Tem Paul Formica. He represents the 20th Senatorial District. You can join us if you have a question for him, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Before the break, Senator, you mentioned TCI. That's the Transportation Climate Initiative. Again, the Democrats want to include this in the state budget. The initiative still has to be figured out completely, but generally it would set a cap on air pollution caused by transportation fuels, then allow for the sale of credits above that cap, and that would create a financial incentive for companies to reduce the pollution. You live on the shore, you represent towns on the shore. Certainly a lot of your residents concerned about how climate is impacting extreme weather, especially on the shoreline. So what are some of your issues with the Transportation Climate Initiative?
Well, I think it should be a broader program if it's going to work. Here specifically in the state of Connecticut, there's news out of Rhode Island this morning that, it's having trouble there because, it doesn't seem to be able to produce what it's talked about producing in terms of air quality. Our air moves from west to east. And some of the problems that are generated in our air quality come from places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, and those states are not involved in this program. Was supposed to be 13 states involved in New England, and it's now down to 3 in the District of Columbia, and I think that we really need to have a federally based supported program if we're going to talk about clean air quality, because if we're doing that here in Connecticut, we're just going to really affect the Atlantic Ocean as the winds move things, to the east. Additionally, it's a $100 million tax. It's designed as a transportation tax. And, you may remember a few years ago when, there was talk of how to fund transportation. And the lockbox was created. Here we are, the first major piece of legislation coming out of this administration with regard to taxing transportation initiatives, and it's exempt and set outside, the controls of that lockbox, which doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I think there are better ways to move forward. I think I'd like to have Governor Lamont and work with the Biden administration to try to, get a broader base of states involved in this if we're going to do something like it. And I'm not adverse to looking at those solutions. But for right now, this thing that's on the table, the reason that it's going into the budget is because I don't believe they can get a bill passed through the General Assembly, even though they hold such a large majority. So, I think there are problems with the idea. We certainly remember last year all the talk about the need for repair of our roads and bridges, the tail end of the toll conversation. We've not heard that this year. So there's been focus on other issues. So we definitely need a good, strong transportation program. How do we pay for it? Republicans put a good idea on the table a few years ago. And if you look, Lucy, at the budget reserve fund, where we suggested taking some money out of that, investing it more into the pension program, taking the savings from the budget debt service and investing that in transportation. If we had done that 2.5 years ago, we would have saved $130 million a year, and we would have been able to invest that in transportation. We'd have projects going right now on our roads and bridges, and we would have recouped all of that money and been back to the $3.5 billion level. So, I think that's indicates to me a good reason why we need to all sit together and come up with ideas that we can work together and find a meeting place in the middle, because we can't kick the can much farther down the road in terms of transportation infrastructure. We need to do some work there.
Senator, you mentioned investing in roads and bridges, but what about investing in public transportation and ways to get these vehicles off the roadways that are causing our emission issue in our region? With transportation, a big reason why we need to do something related to climate change.
Well, I think we're seeing that. The auto dealers here in the state of Connecticut have gone from not having any electric vehicles a few short years ago to offering 45 different models of electric vehicles. I think the public is slowly beginning to embrace the idea of how to manage an electric vehicle without, having a strong infrastructure of electric charging stations. I know that part of the initiative, I think about 30% of the initiative from the TCI was to invest in these things. And to try to grow that program. And I think that makes sense. But, this program was really designed, this TCI program was designed to really eliminate, fossil fuel and make it very difficult for fossil fuel to survive, 10 years from now, and force everyone to, to move into electric vehicles when I'm not quite sure people are ready completely to do that. So I think we are moving in that direction. I think public transportation is moving into electrification. Right now, we have to worry about getting people in and out of our cities because people are working from home. And, our cities are going to be in trouble with a lot of vacant office buildings on top of the first floor that typically is populated by small businesses in these cities, and depending on those office spaces and, for their customer base. And, I think those are problems that we need to discuss and really put on the table to see how we can solve that. I think electric vehicles are going to be the wave of the future. And I think we can see that in the fact that, as I mentioned, there are 45 models that are in showrooms across the state of Connecticut, this morning.
You mentioned electric vehicles, but when I think about public transportation and people in cities who don't want to be driving, and they're thinking more about trains and city buses and ways to invest in that, Senator Formica.
Well, I think that, you're seeing those investments. Governor Lamont has talked about some investments. The delegation here in southeastern Connecticut has talked about expanding Shoreline East. And those initiatives have to move forward. Especially as, people are becoming more mobile. And I think, the younger folks, my kids, and that generation, probably will embrace that more and more as we move forward. But I think, people working from home, I think that's going to have an impact on how mobile people are and the impact on the cost of public transportation. So there are good initiatives. There are different fuel sources for public transportation that are more environmentally friendly, and electrification is certainly one of them. And I'm sure that that's going to happen.
Let's move on. I know last week the state Senate approved a bill that declares racism a public health crisis. We know many Americans thinking of the Minneapolis man George Floyd, who was murdered, his anniversary of his death just the other day. You voted for this measure that declares racism a public health crisis. Why did you do that?
Well, listen, I think it's long since time that, we really put the issue of eliminating systematic racism in this country on the table. And I think, I would support anything that we can do to improve social justice. The bill, did say that racism is a public health crisis, but it also contained, a number of mechanisms that would, collect some research and data on racial bias, how it exists, how it affects the state. And I think, you have to, that's one of the things that we have to do. The George Floyd situation and the murder that he underwent very publicly, I think had the effect on this nation in driving this conversation forward. And we can't let that opportunity waste. And so, this is the greatest country in the world. I can attest to that from where I started. And here I am in the opportunity to serve Connecticut in this great way. And that American dream has to be open and available to everyone, no matter what color. So, I think, and I support anything that we can do to carry this conversation and change, to change that thinking so that we eliminate racism once and for all.
I mean, it's good to hear you say that, Senator Formica, when we think about, saying you wanted to support anything, you would support anything to support social justice. But there's been a lot of attention, too, on systemic racism in our country. And even in our state, when we think of racism as a public health crisis, this bill would create a commission to report data back to lawmakers to figure out ways to impact health disparities and others that disproportionately affect Black and brown residents. But I wanted to point to work by another commission, the Connecticut Mirror, reporting on the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, issuing a 51-page report the other day stating segregation born of zoning policies has had a particularly deadly effect during the COVID-19 pandemic, also disproportionately affecting residents of color in our state. And we look to what the State House did the other week, passing zoning reform legislation that strips out or scales back many of the controversial sections that would have made it easier for more affordable housing to open up in Connecticut suburbs, in towns that you also represent, Senator Formica. So when this legislation comes before the Senate, where do you stand on zoning reform proposals and making the state affordable for everyone?
I'm a former first selectman, as you may recall, and we worked hard in the 7 years that I was the first selectman of East Lyme, to open up opportunities for affordable housing and workforce housing. And there are ways that you can do that within the community and gain support. I have not looked at the language. I understand that bill has changed significantly since it was discussed some 3 weeks ago. So I will be looking at it and see what impact it is. Excuse me, but I also think it's important to make sure that it's practically implementable. And part of the problem that we have seen with pushing affordable housing through the state is that many of the people that would qualify for affordable housing don't qualify for financing. And there has to be a better way. There has to be a better solution that's part and parcel of this whole conversation. So again, my history is strong in moving affordable housing into communities, especially East Lyme. As chair of the Council of Governments, we had those conversations when it was my term in that office. And I think those conversations continue and should continue. But they also have to be practically implementable. And I think that's the next step of how we move forward. And we're going to have some issues, in the cities, as I talked about before, people living and working there, that is going to change. We need to encompass housing and recreation and opportunities for everybody throughout our state. And I think most communities embrace that. They just want to be able to have a say and not be dictated by the government of the state of Connecticut in how those zoning changes are going to work. So it's part of the conversation that's evolving, and it's a good thing that we're talking about these things here in the state of Connecticut because, that's how things are going to improve. If we don't talk about it, if we don't come together and debate it honestly and vigorously, then solutions are not going to come forward as fast as they should.
This is a conversation that's been happening for some time. This is, I think, the first time we've seen such an effort to get lawmakers to look at zoning reform. But when I look at these bills, they don't really take away control from planning and zoning, but they're trying to compel towns to do more to offer multifamily housing or accessory dwelling units in particular communities. And there just seems to be such a backlash because we know we are a state of steady habits. So we can talk about having conversations, Senator, but when will there actually be movement to help people in our state?
Well, I think, you go back to when I was first selectman. I've been a senator, it's my 7th year. So it was before that. There were opportunities that we put forward for incentive housing zones, for example, which increased the designation of the amount of housing that you can put on a parcel in return for benefits to the developer and the community. And we put a number of those in place in downtown Niantic and in our zoning. So the conversations have been around for a while. We just need to make sure that they're implemented, and they have to move forward. Excuse me. But we also have to make sure that people have the opportunity to practically be able to afford to do that and to live there. And, having, a multifamily home in East Lyme or, Sprague is one thing. I think we should look at the opportunity to not confine this debate to deed restricted housing. I mean, there is plenty of affordable housing in places in, northeastern Connecticut, western Connecticut, around East Lyme, and in central southeastern Connecticut. Given, the real estate bubble that we're in right now, there's the inventory is short, but there are a lot of less expensive homes that could be deemed affordable and take into consideration the amount of affordable housing that people have. And there can be programs developed to try to get people into those homes. And I think, that's as important as changing and altering zoning regulations from the state to the towns.
I think the frustration is that it is so piecemeal that you have some towns maybe working on this, but other towns, they just won't budge. They don't want to see this type of development in their town, and it's just frustrating. I think when we hear about how so many people in our state need a place to live, Senator Formica, it shouldn't be just your town of East Lyme or others making an effort.
Well, and I guess that's the conversation that we have to have. And how do we do that? And can the state force feed it, or is it something that we can get together and have conversations about? I know it's something we have to talk about, and hopefully that's part of the conversation. It's been a big part of the conversation this legislative session, that's for sure.
Well, I've appreciated the time you've given us today. State Senate Republican Leader Pro Tem Paul Formica, representing the 20th District. Thank you for coming on the show. We'd love to talk with you again in the future.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're going to hear from Hearst, Connecticut's politics reporter Julia Bergman. Again, that legislative session ending in just a couple of weeks, about more of the bills that may move forward before that deadline. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We just heard from the second highest ranking Republican in the state Senate, Senator Paul Formica. For more context, joining us now on Zoom, Julia Bergman, politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut. Julia, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Lucy.
So we hit several things. I wanted to hear your take on the senator's comments. Let's start with this indictment of Senator Dennis Bradley. I asked him to talk about the program that Bradley is alleged to have tried to defraud, and I'm wondering if you can respond to what you heard.
I think many senators, both Republicans and Democrats, are reluctant to say too much at this point. Given, we just have charges, we don't have any kind of guilty verdict at this point. So I think, the senator was obviously playing it cautiously, as to be expected, waiting for more details to unfold. Senator Bradley just appeared in court for the first time yesterday afternoon, and obviously it was business as usual in the Capitol. So the senator was obviously focused on that. So I think waiting for more details is the stance that most lawmakers are taking at this point.
Can you walk us through the debate that happened last night? Was it shorter than usual when we think about how the state is now moving forward once the governor signs in and gets approval from the federal government, of course, on online gambling and sports betting, Julia?
Yeah, I think in some ways it was an anticlimactic ending. I mean, this has been debated for years or talked about for years. And in the end, it was a relatively short debate on the floor of the Senate last night before they voted to approve the measure. As the senator mentioned, the Lamont administration had to step in at various points, and negotiations broke down at various points. So in the end, it was somewhat easy to pass after all that had happened.
So walk us through, because I'd asked the senator about the timeline of how soon sports betting will be allowed in Connecticut. What can you tell us, Julia?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little while to get set up. I think there's hope that by the time the NFL will be playing in the fall, that things will be in place by then. But definitely a lot of work to do. On the revenue side, I think the projection is $28 million in this fiscal year that's starting July 1st. So a lot of money that could be on the table, but certainly a lot of details still to be worked out.
It is interesting when we think about revenue as being one of the factors, of course, and protecting jobs and then the southeastern corner, as lawmakers have stated. But when we think about another revenue generator that the governor put in his budget, and that is legalizing cannabis, where does that stand?
So they're still working on a deal right now. There's talk potentially of maybe some kind of longer debate happening on the Saturday before the session ends, June 9th. That's a possibility. There's always, traditionally legislators come in for a long day that Saturday before. So that could definitely happen. You and the senator were talking a lot about these racial inequities that have existed for a very long time. And that's definitely part of the legalizing cannabis debate as well. There's progressive Democrats who believe that there needs to be more equity provisions in the bill and make sure that those are really clear, so that those who were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, get a fair share going forward in how this, retail cannabis market would play out in Connecticut.
I want to talk more about the budget, the deal that's potentially happening behind closed doors, right, between the Democratic legislative leaders and the governor. One bone of contention, of course, some progressive lawmakers wanting to shift that tax burden away from the middle class. And some proposals out to hike some taxes on the wealthy. I mean, where does that stand? And do you think that, Senator Formica thinks that with the Governor Lamont not being supportive of that it won't be happening this year, potentially? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more potentially agreement between, or areas of agreement between the Lamont administration and the Republicans on some of these issues in the state budget. The Governor Lamont has drawn a very hard line about not wanting to increase taxes on the wealthy. He says we're flush in federal cash from COVID relief money. The rainy day fund is at an all-time high. So I think Lamont is going to be very hard pressed to do any kind of large-scale tax increases on wealthy residents. But again, this is also part of the debate of the long-standing systemic inequities. And there are members of Lamont's own party who believe that now is the opportunity to really address these. Connecticut is in a very good fiscal position, so it's going to take more than the federal funding. The state's got to pony up more money to deal with this. So I think it's definitely going to be a very, very interesting debate to watch in the coming weeks.
And I should say a couple of those income tax surcharge proposals on the wealthy, some of that revenue could pay for earned income tax credits, help families who have been struggling, especially in this pandemic. We know for the wealthy, they've continued to make money during the pandemic. It's been the stock market has been going well, and it's just interesting to see how this debate continues, Julia, in these next couple of weeks, if a budget deal will be agreed upon before June 9th.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's an activist group called Recovery for All that has really been pushing this angle and pushing legislators to finally, move on this. They've put out a report that included how much money Connecticut's billionaires made over the pandemic using data or a list from Forbes that Forbes updates every day called the Real-Time Billionaires List. And it showed that Connecticut billionaires gained more than $12 billion during the pandemic. Like you said, a lot of that tied to stock portfolios and real estate investments. And so they're arguing, this is a perfect example of, let's use this money and let's invest it, tax these people and use the money to make a more equitable system here in Connecticut.
We just have a couple of minutes left, Julia. We just got a tweet, someone writing, rules against multifamily housing are just closeted racism in Connecticut. We spent some time talking about these zoning reform bills, Senator Formica, as well as many members of his party saying that, there should not be a state mandate to force towns to permit particular development. This has been a contentious issue this legislative session. What will be happening in terms of some of these bills moving forward, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think for many activists and supporters of, strengthening zoning laws here in Connecticut, they were pretty upset about the bill that came out of the weekend bill, as they're calling it, that came out of the House and now goes to the Senate. I think there's a real debate over or concern over local control and giving away local control. But, I think activists are pretty clear that this, who are behind this legislation, that that local municipalities will still have a lot of control, and that it just basically kind of sets up barometers so that they don't, so that they actually follow through on these plans to make more affordable housing in their municipalities.
I mentioned that legislative deadline coming up June 9th before the session ends. Anything that we're missing that you want to talk about, Julia?
No, I think we covered it all. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks, definitely for sure. And stay tuned.
Well, I want to thank Julia Bergman for joining us. She's the politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut Media. Julia, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lucy.
I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Matt Dwyer with help from Carmen Baskoff. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. You can download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.